It's quite interesting. It's really interesting. Well, it's in the Bonnevaux, yeah, written a book. Yeah, I haven't read it, but I think he's right. Maybe it's a very useful teacher. Well, I mean, there's lots of things in there that, are you familiar with Dr. Gabriel? No. Well, he's a Canadian physician who's working in his work with trauma and addiction and healing and intergenerational trauma. Yeah. Well, it's very true. The thing is how to hear it, how to feel it. Right? Yeah. So he yeah, so he does all this training to heal intergenerational. So it's a question of how best to use these things. Yes, but for instance,
You get a new tripod?
Yeah, this is the one I usually keep with me. I have since some years ago. It's good.
This is fresh water, just so you gotta
thank
put
you,
it in
thank
there.
you.
So.
I was thinking it was not old.
Yeah, no, I just put it in.
Testing. Testing, testing. Hello, testing. 1, 2, testing. Testing. Testing, testing. Hello, testing. 1, 2, testing. Testing. Testing, testing. That's good. So we pharmacist after lunch sometime. What do you need then? Do you want to go? I'd like to go. So we should probably leave about 2 o'clock. I think just check. Good. Just to let you know that Giovanni is watching you. He's going to have to keep his distance for a few days because his partner has tested positive, but no serious symptoms. But just to be on the safe side. And he'll be joining us online. He's tuning in for this talk, and he'll be with us interactively this evening for the 5 o'clock. Good. So the first thing I wanted to look at today was a more, a practical way in which we can think of daily life as related to this experience of fullness and emptiness, and maintain or develop that feeling of equanimity and balance that we were talking about yesterday. Because there is this cycle between fullness and emptiness, this relationship between them, and we've understood that, I think. But how do we maintain that equilibrium that allows us to continue peacefully, calmly, normally through the ups and downs? And sometimes the ups are very high, and sometimes the downs are very low. I was struck by this some years ago when talking with a group of school boys who were just about to graduate from high school, and they'd been meditating for a few years with a really excellent teacher who they clearly admired and loved very much. And he had really given them this amazing gift of meditation. And they just accepted it. These were, kind of really quite macho Australian boys who, at the same time, had this deep insight and appreciation for meditation. And they'd often meet in the lunch break, I think, under a tree outside in the hot weather in Queensland to meditate. And once the Bishop Putney was walking by just as they were forming their little group for a short meditation, and he said, "Hi, Bishop, come over and join us." And he walked over and meditated with them. That's what the church should be like. So now, when talking with them, they were asking themselves and wanting to discuss what would happen when they left school and they didn't have this support system anymore, and when they went to college or they got jobs. And they also were talking about the importance of how they saw the gift that they had, and how many of their friends who went to different schools who didn't have this gift or resource or this part of their life. And, and they noticed that these friends, going through the ups and downs of adolescence, were much less capable of dealing with the slings and arrows of fortune. In other words, when something went wrong, or they got a broken heart, or they were tempted by harmful things like drugs, their friends, they noticed, had less strength or resilience or stillness, we might say, whatever, to deal with those situations. So the end of the conversation we had really was how they felt it a call, I suppose you'd say, to to speak about meditation and to maybe start to share it with their contemporaries when they left the school. I don't know if they did, but it was wonderful, though, to hear them say that and come to this conclusion entirely on their own, just as a result of feeling, experiencing the gift of meditation over a period of very important years of development. So, yesterday, when Carol made her oblation, she mentioned that she had been looking for some years for a rule of life, a way to regulate or some shape or structure. And I'm sure we've all done that on New Year's Day, many years. We work out the best way that we can live and divide our time and balance our life and do everything we want to do, but in a balanced way. And so she said she had, like all of us, I'm sure, wanted to have a rule in life, and it had always fallen apart. Is that right? Good. So, and then in the rule of Benedict, and in the community, because when she spoke about the rule, she also spoke about community as well, that in this combination of seeing the wisdom of the rule, which is all about balance and integration, dynamic balance and disciplined integration, but seeing that and sharing that appreciation, that wisdom with a group of others, with a community formed by it. So that I think leads us to this question of a rule of life, and how can we see life as Benedict sees it, for example, in a very optimistic way. The purpose of life is to share fully in the cycle of the life of Christ, the dying and the rising, the emptiness and the fullness of Christ, so that we may share fully in the resurrection, he says. And then also in the prologue, which we listened to yesterday, he has this sort of haunting image of living and opening our eyes, our perception, the eye of the heart, to the divinizing light. And I think in that translation we heard last night, it was the light that comes from God. But other translations may be more accurate by calling it the divinizing light. So deep within ourselves, we are opening our eyes, learning to see with the eye of the heart the light of God, and to see that light means we become what that light is. As St. John says, what we shall be like we do not yet know, but we do know that we shall be like him because we shall see him as he truly is. So we can't imagine it, because the kind of seeing that is involved is not about images. An image is always something outside of ourselves. It's an object cast by our thoughts or by our brains outside or separate from ourselves in some way. Images can be very powerful and very useful, of course, also very negative as well. But this spiritual vision, the eye of the heart, is not about seeing something. It's about seeing. And it's a seeing that mystical tradition, and we see it in many cases in the scriptures as well. It's a seeing that involves the experience of being seen. The eye that sees is, how does it go? The eye with which we see is the eye that sees us. So we find this as a recurrent theme in many mystical teachers and writers and poets. I think it's inherent in what Jesus says to Thomas: to see me is to see the Father. That's why when he calls attention to himself, at the same time we are paying attention to something through him, with him, but also through him. We go with him, through him, and in him, to the Father in the Spirit. So it's another kind of perception that we are learning to develop or to become, in which we move into unified consciousness, the theme of this year. And we may get moments of that, glimpses of that, intuitions of that. We may read about it and we have a sense, yeah, I came close to this, or that's the meaning, or part of the meaning of something I experienced in the past. So it's something that is evolving, but clearly our goal or our destiny and purpose and meaning. And it gives us a fuller sense of fullness. So, first thing is, how do we live in the light of this meaning? If this is what we are here for, how can we ensure that our lifestyle is appropriate to us, but is best suited to facilitating, developing this meaning and this growth? And not surprisingly, the early Christians were not concerned about questions of dogma. They didn't have much dogma to start off with. The dogma came over the next 300 or 400 years. So they weren't concerned about catechisms and getting the ideas right and arguing so much about ideas. It was always more about orthopraxy rather than orthodoxy. It was orthopraxy, meaning living in the best way. And they even called themselves the followers of the way. But they also saw that this way that they were following could not be separated from the person of Christ. Because he was, whichever way you looked, he was there with you. You were in him as he was in you. So the union of mind and heart and body with Christ, even to the extent that they saw themselves collectively as the body of Christ. So this meant they couldn't step outside of Christ and, as it were, argue about the ideas. And St. Paul, in one of his letters to the Greeks, gets very impatient with them because they were very intellectual and argumentative and philosophical, and they got stuck in these idle and hollow speculations, he called them. They were missing the point. So the early Christians, and I think essential Christianity, or what we might call contemplative Christianity, focuses much more upon the presentness of the experience of Christ, in which we are growing, changing, and the kind of life we're living that best responds to that and facilitates that. So, and one example of that, as I said, is the rule of St. Benedict. And let's just remember that the rule of St. Benedict was written for lay people, not for what we think of as monks, people who are consecrated and very often ordained priests, all of which came, quite a long time after, hundreds of years after Benedict himself. Benedict was not a priest. He allowed priests to come into the monastery, to the community, and he respected their priesthood, but that was it. He was very careful that they should not be, that the community should not become clericalized. One of the temptations facing the church, according to Pope Francis. First is ideology, treating the gospel as if it was an ideology, with a kind of thought police, as we've experienced in the past. Secondly, the danger of the temptation of running the church organizationally as if it were a bureaucracy, depersonalizing relationships and so on, putting the system of government before the persons. And the third temptation, which is particularly sensitive to, is clericalism, the power structure which puts priests less in a relationship of service to the people and more in a relationship of domination. So, this is for Benedict, these problems didn't exist, certainly to the degree that they do for us after 1500 years. Anyway, so let's just think. Excuse me. Let's just think how we could imagine a way of life that would facilitate and enhance our way of living in Christ and coming to the fullness of life. Well, I think the first thing we would probably all agree on would be the importance of balancing the day, morning and evening, with a time of meditation. And that sounds fairly obvious and desirable, but one should not underestimate the huge challenge that represents to people in modern lifestyle, how difficult it is for people to make that part of their life in such a way that it just becomes part of your life, you don't have to think about it. And it can take years for busy, active people or even for non-busy, non-active people, to develop that twice daily rhythm. It's many people, who meditate will say they meditate once a day. Does it make a difference if you meditate twice a day? Sure it does. And they will be the first to tell you, the people who do start to put the second meditation in will say how different it is. Now, of course, if you start saying it's very important for you to meditate twice a day, and I don't, or I can't, then the danger is that it feels as if it's some kind of finger wagging or demands being put on you, and you would feel guilty. You should feel guilty or inadequate or sinful if you don't do it, especially if you depending on who's telling you or advising you. So the way that this is taught is very important, which is why it's really important that this is taught in a egalitarian way, by not by just by monks or clergy or professional religious people, if you want to call them that, but by lay people, and that's what's happened in our community. The overwhelming number of teachers sharing the teaching in weekly groups or in other ways are lay people. And that gives you a lot more authority in a way, because you can say, I really believe in meditation. I'm very happy to be here this evening to talk with you about it, but really I'm a very bad meditator. It gives you huge authority. And so use it. If you go in and you sort of want to show off that you've read this or you read that, or you've got some special gift, or you've been doing that, I've been meditating for 30 years, and obviously then you lose that authority. You just become an authoritarian figure. Authority is something that has to be given to you, not something that you assume and use over others. So you need to go into a teaching moment like that with nothing, even not knowing what you're going to say. As Jesus said in the Gospel the other day, don't worry about what you're going to say. Your Father will give you what you need to say. So communicating this, apparently very simple and obvious teaching, is a question in itself and is a challenge. But it's also revealing the kind of church, or the kind of network that that Christianity is becoming. Contemplative and lay inspired. That doesn't mean to say that you don't have a ministry or a call or a responsibility. Of course, it does. But it's something that you feel. And it's, at a certain point, people who meditate, however badly, but they will come to this point where they say, I want to share this with others. So that's the first thing, meditating twice a day. The second, I think, is having this kind of rule of life in terms of balancing the demands and the needs of different aspects of your humanity. The physical, keeping healthy, exercise or yoga or eating healthily, that aspect of it, but also being for Benedict, work meant really manual work on the whole. Increasingly it meant, for some monks anyway, sitting in the scriptorium writing out the manuscripts. There's a kind of manual work too. But when he speaks about the working hours of the day, he thinks more in terms of physical work around the place or in the farm or wherever. If we think of manual work today, most people it's on your keyboard. But anyway, in some way, respecting the needs and the demands of your body and loving that. The other element of our humanity is the mental, the intellectual, we might call it. So just as we should take some concern about what we eat, so we should also be concerned about what we ingest in our lifestyle of Netflix and other social media. I mean, the addiction to social media, to our phones, is a sign of some serious imbalance there. And when you go to the dentists, do you flip through? Actually, most people don't flip through the magazines anymore. I notice they're on their phones. But in the old days, you used to flip through the magazines, and it was, I mean, I'm not saying you can't watch a Netflix or anything else. You can do what you like, but it's a question of quality control, and quantity. How much of your time is spent ingesting this sort of low-grade, fast food sort of mental content. Having something to read, as spiritual reading, lectio, the scriptures, obviously, making sure that some scripture is part of your daily reading, and maybe even having some course of study, but reading something that you really like, but that is also really nourishing you. We're starting fairly soon now. We've just finished the first term, or the first pilot term, an online and in-person teaching platform called the Academy, WCCM Academy. So it will be a 2-year program with 3 layers. One is contemplative Christianity. The other is contemplative wisdom in other traditions. And the third is, how do we apply this wisdom to the crisis of humanity that we are in at the moment? So there will be each term, there will be 3 terms of 8 weeks each, and then each student will have a tutor who will sort of mentor them through the course, through the 2-year course, and there will be 2 or 3 classes every week, about an hour each, and a meditation session together. And then our idea is that there'll be an opportunity to come to Bonnevaux at the beginning of each year and at the end of each year, so that there's a physical aspect to it and a collective aspect. So,
for all ages?
For all ages, yes. Well, we're starting, as I say, we ran the pilot with 15 people for 8 weeks. Went very well, got very good, useful feedback. You were involved, Liz, weren't you? I thought you were a tutor, right? Okay, yeah, you will be. I hope so. I thought, anyway, you want. So, anybody here do it? No. So we're hoping to launch it in the fall, after the summer. Yeah. Is there a... Yes, it's fairly reasonable. I can't remember what it is. And with everything that we do, we ask people, we say that we don't want financial difficulties or limitations to prevent people from doing it. So, but we have to charge, yes. I mean, we're not doing very well financially at the moment. But anyway, this is, so I can't remember what it is, but it's very reasonable.
Just when you say visit Bonnevaux at the beginning and at the end, do you mean at the beginning of the 2 years and at the very end of the 2 years?
No, I think each year.
So
Yeah.
that's the
For a week. I mean, if people can come, obviously, but.
that's the challenge. I did look at it very seriously, but I'm trying to get here twice a year.
Well, people do what you can. Yeah.
What's it actually called?
The Academy.
The Academy.
Yeah, WCCM Academy. And I must say, we have some excellent teachers in each of those streams. For example, Sarah Batchelor taught the first course on contemplative Christianity. Barry White taught the second course on health. And Stefan Reynolds sort of monitored his online course of the roots of Christian mysticism. So I won't reveal yet exactly who is doing the first term because it hasn't been confirmed. But
So what is it? Was it sort of pilot scheme, was it?
that was a pilot scheme. Yeah. And it gave us a lot of insight. I mean, a lot of encouragement.
Yeah.
But we learned a few things also about timing it, because what time of the day is important. So we'll wiggle a little bit with that, maybe each term, so that it's easier for people in other parts of the world. So those are the sort of practical things we're looking at. But the feedback was very good. The classes were excellent, and people really felt it. In fact, I don't know how many, but certainly some of the people who did that said that they will sign up for the full course. So that's one way, anyway. But we could talk about that also maybe later. But that's one way of building into one's life a structure. I mean, I think basically we all recognize the need for structure and actually the inevitability of structure. We all develop habits. Habits are structure, and bad habits are easily acquired, difficult to change. Good habits take usually a little more effort, but give more delight. Whereas bad habits, like eating the wrong things or binging on something, tend to make us feel unwell, either mentally or otherwise. So a rule of life that gives a structure to the day and can build in a wise way and a flexible way, not rigid. Usually, I think most rules of life we make for ourselves break down because they're too rigid. And so Benedict has a great wisdom here. Then there are the third element. So we've got the twice-a-day meditation, a rule of life, and then what Benedict calls in chapter 4 tools of good works, and that the Buddhists called upaya, which is often translated as skillful means. So these are tricks, little things that you can that remind you or stimulate you to remain consciously on the way, and will pull you back when you have wandered off it. I'll give you an idea here, except I can't find it. Okay, so some of the tools of good works for Saint Benedict. Day by day, remind yourself you are going to die. If you don't think about it, then do think about it. Hour by hour, keep careful watch of all you do. So, how might you do that? You could put a little ping on your mobile phone. I think the Thich Nhat Hanh people have a little thing that sets off a mindfulness bell during the day. Well, you can do that just on your clock or on our app as well, WCCM app. So keep careful watch of all you do. Maybe in between tasks of the day, build in a 1 minute time to breathe. Not going to, if you're late anyway, for an appointment, 1 minute isn't going to make any difference, but you will go into the meeting calmer. So, or, just before you go out shopping, the Russians used to have this practice of stopping and sitting as a family or as a group if they were traveling somewhere. Just when they had all their bags packed and waiting for the carriage to take them, they would sit for a few moments in silence. So to do that for 30 seconds before you go. Dash harmful thoughts against the rock of Christ and open them to your spiritual guide. So don't bottle up harmful thoughts, don't turn them into secrets that can become toxic, but he says dash them against the rock of Christ and also and open them, and that may be the way of dashing them against the rock of Christ is to open them, to speak about them with somebody you trust and who knows you. Speak no foolish chatter or just to provoke laughter. So that doesn't mean be miserable and po-faced all the time. But I was in a community once where there was a monk who was very funny. The only problem was he was only funny. He was endlessly funny. And at every moment, whatever he was doing, it was a joke. And it was funny. And I think, we were watching that, you know what I'm going to say? I was watching that private discussion among some of the world leaders at, I think it was a G7 meeting the other day, and they didn't realize that there was a microphone close enough to hear them. And Boris Johnson started them off laughing, which seems to be his gift. It seems to be how he operates. So they were laughing about Putin, and Putin taking off his shirt and riding bareback on a horse, the sort of the macho tyrant sort of thing. And so Boris was saying, maybe we should take off our shirts. Maybe we should take off all our clothes. So funny, but after a while, you think, is this really funny, or is it just evading the truth? Is it just avoiding being serious about life? John Maine used to say, seriousness leads to joy, solemnity leads to frivolity. So, anyway, Benedict clearly aware of this danger of foolish chatter. Listen readily to holy reading. Obey the orders of the abbot unreservedly, even if he doesn't act in the same way. So, harbor neither jealousy nor hatred. Do nothing out of envy, respect the elders, love the young. And finally, never lose hope in God's mercy. So there's a long list of these tools of good works in chapter 4 of the rule, which are little tricks or tools that you can call to mind, or will come to mind if you are familiar with them and you've read it many times. They will come to mind at the appropriate moment and just give you a little automatic ping, which you don't need from your phone because it will just come from the place where these memories are stored, and they will be triggered by circumstances in your life, or you. And the fourth thing I was going to mention was what the Jesuit, the Ignatian spirituality has highlighted, which is the examen at the end of the day. At Monte Oliveto, at Compline, just before Compline starts, the abbot, well, as it's been opened, the abbot then says, now examine de conscientia, to examine your conscience. So it's just even if it's 2 or 3 minutes, to recall the day, and it may have been a really good day, or it may be have been a really bad day, and you are glad that it's over, and hope that you'll sleep well and get through, have a better day tomorrow. But just to have this pause of conscious reflection. It's not, oh, how have I sinned today? How am I going to make up for all these sins? But just to be aware of the cycle of fullness and emptiness that you have been through that day. So those are some practical ideas drawn from collective wisdom and present in many traditions about how to shape our daily life in such a way that we can remain steady, with equanimity, open to what comes, and enter into the moment. If we fail to understand the dynamic between fullness and emptiness, in other words, if we look just for fullness, pleasure, happiness, in the wrong places, usually, and if we run away from anything that looks as if it might be emptiness, or we deny it, or we cover it up, then the result of that is clearly going to be a big imbalance, a one-sidedness. And if we fall into that, then we miss out on the pleroma, because the pleroma includes fullness and emptiness. If you just go for the fullness, well, you get what you pay for. But you miss out on the fullness of fullness, which is the pleroma. And we're left with a one-dimensional fullness, the happiness of a consumer mind, a reduced happiness. This is why when we think of the Beatitudes, these are an 8, well, depending on which gospel you choose, but an 8-step Christian path of happiness. And this articulation, the Sermon on the Mount, of Jesus' Beatitudes are an offshoot of his discovery of the pleroma of God. That's why they're quite difficult for us to process, because they express not just happiness or the struggle with unhappiness, but with the integration or the inclusion of fullness and emptiness in the experience of life. It clearly, the Beatitudes clearly accept and unify what are apparent opposites. And it's this unity of opposites that create the door, the portal of paradox. Noticing, I don't know whether it's some science fiction drama or films or series these days, there's very often this idea of a door or a portal from this world into another world. And as in what's it called? His Dark Materials.
The Martian?
Yes, could be. Yes.
Star Trek and the Wormhole.
The Wormhole. Yes. Yeah, it goes back a long way. I'm thinking of His Dark Materials. Was it Philip Pullman's book? Very much, or even Harry Potter, actually. Platform 14B, is it, or something? No, and what? 9 3/4. So the idea of a transition between ordinary consciousness, this world, and an enhanced consciousness in another world. Anyway, this portal, I think, is what is provided by paradox. Not usually in these things, but in the Gospels, anyway. So, for example, how blessed, how happy are those who are poor in spirit. Could be translated as know their need for God. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. So poverty or need is related, that's emptiness, is related directly to the fullness, the pleroma of the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God means the pleroma of God. How happy are the sorrowful, they shall find consolation. You couldn't have a more dramatic paradox than that. Happy in your sorrow because you will find consolation. How happy are those of a gentle spirit, they shall have the earth for their possession. It's in gentleness that we find power. Think of the law of non-violence. How happy are those who hunger and thirst to see justice prevail. They shall be satisfied. So happy in hunger and thirst, because this leads to fullness, to satisfaction. How blessed are those who have suffered persecution for the cause of right. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. Somebody who referred to that very often was Francis of Assisi. Whenever he was humiliated and kicked out of the town, and his friends were all depressed and angry about it, and he was always ecstatic. He said, "This is wonderful. Be pleased about it." So, and then these two other beatitudes, which are just sort of dropped in there, which are not so obviously about paradox, but which reveal what is happening in this paradox. How happy are those whose hearts are pure, for they shall see God. So purity of heart opens up the eye of the heart. How happy are the peacemakers, God shall call them his children. So we have to learn to use this portal, again, in daily life. Every day presents us with innumerable opportunities in order to live fully as we are intended to live. The problem is, of course, today especially, that we've got used to living in a paradigm of scarcity. Every time you turn on the news, it's about we're running out of things, or there isn't enough money to run the National Health Service or public services. And where has this come from? Because quite clearly, there is enough to go around. Elon Musk today said that he was withdrawing from his bid $44 billion to buy Twitter for whatever reason he wanted to do it for. Well, that would go a long way to build some hospitals and to make sure that children went to school at all in some places, or went to school with food in their stomachs. So there's plenty to go around, but we still have this paradigm of scarcity. We think there's not. As long as we are driven by unconscious greed and possessiveness, we will act as if there isn't enough to go around. When this start, well, I mean, it's been part of human nature, of course, from the beginning. We see it exposed in the prophets of the Old Testament, their anger at injustice, the hoarding of wealth, and the exploitation of the poor. So you might say it's nothing new. But the scale is the problem, I think. And the fact that it has become, it's no longer something that is so readily exposed, it's something that is. So as Charles Taylor said, again here at the end of his talks, our hope for the future is that we come to an ethical insight. Ethical could almost, I think, be put as a spiritual insight, but spiritual makes it sound a bit something you do on Saturdays and Sundays. But an ethical insight is something that we discover and live with Monday to Friday as well. So anyway, I don't want to go too much into politics, but in the 80s, this was where a big shift took place in global consciousness. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were elected the same year, and as we know, formed a great buddy relationship, sharing a common view of. Let's leave it till this afternoon. We haven't got time now. A shared view of anti-government, government control, government power, government interference, anti-Keynesian economics, confidence in the private market. Market forces will sort things out for us. Quite obviously they don't. And low taxes. So in general, a shift to what people call the right. Belief that government interference is what causes the problems. Neoliberal economics. So I mean, that's a state of mind, right or wrong. I realize what I said, you can argue about it, and we should argue about it, we should discuss it. There's no point in polarizing points of view. But clearly there was a huge movement of deregulation which led to bringing about the near collapse of the global economy within a matter of it could have happened within 3 or 4 hours, according to Mark Carney. They had a meeting of the world's heads of financial heads, and Gordon Brown made a huge contribution to it. And but they asked him, how close do you think we were to going over the edge? And what does that mean? It means you can't get any money. You can't go to the ATM machine. Nothing there. Your credit card is meaningless. Your bank balance is inaccessible. Money cannot move around. How do you eat that evening? How do you feed your children? So you're right on the edge of this global financial abyss, is what he calls it, Mark Carney. So, so it's a state of mind, but state of mind that could have caused unbelievable suffering, and unnecessarily. And behind that, you have to, I would put this as a whole attitude towards justice, towards decency, which is immediately obscured by when greed is justified as good. We simply lose touch. The eye of the heart gradually loses its vision. Now, it's happened before. If you look at the Victorian poor laws, they were constructed largely not out of compassion, but in order to keep social control over this dangerous part of the population, the poor, who were regarded as being largely responsible for their own misfortune. So again, a state of mind that clearly needs to be changed. The attitude of the British government in the 19th century to the Irish famine. It was ideologically that they refused, or they gave totally inadequate aid. Aid was coming in from American Indians and Indians, East Asian Indians, shaming the lack of intervention. Huh? And Muslims, yeah. Shaming. But the justification of that policy, you can read it in the minutes of the cabinet meetings of the British government, and even the racism there. So, this is not just about blaming people, it's also calling ourselves to account. And a world in the American world, in which I think they did a survey of Christians, and something like 60% believed that the phrase, God helps those who help themselves, is in the Bible, which is revealing. So I end with that because fullness, the pleroma, cannot be fully known or experienced unless it is enacted, embodied, and therefore it will spill over It must spill over into the way we live and to the way we elect governments and the way we hold governments to account and the way we organize ourselves generally and the state of democracy. That there is a real relationship there. And we see that in Jesus' own teaching and in the teachings of the prophets and in the spirit of the gospel down the ages. So our experience of contemplation, which we understand, fortunately, to be our way of opening ourselves to this human destiny of fullness, and with the acceptance of emptiness, which produces the pleroma or releases the pleroma, there is cannot be separated from our social awareness or responsibility. There is enough to go around. If the pleroma of God is God's, infinite, there's plenty to go around. And anyone who says otherwise needs their head examined. So, listen to, we'll end with this story which comes very soon after the Beatitudes in chapter 15 of Matthew. After leaving that region, Jesus took the road by the Sea of Galilee and went up to the hills. When he was seated there, crowds flocked to him, bringing with them the lame, blind, dumb, and crippled, and many other sufferers. They threw them down at his feet, and he healed them. Great was the amazement of the people when they saw the dumb speaking, the crippled strong, the lame walking, and sight restored to the blind, and they gave praise to the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I feel sorry for all these people. They have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away unfed. They might faint on the way. The disciples replied, But where in this lonely place can we find bread enough to feed such a crowd? How many loaves do you have? He asked. 7, they replied, and there are a few small fish. So he ordered the people to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and after giving thanks to God, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. And they all ate to their heart's content. And the scraps left over, which they picked up, were enough to fill 7 baskets. 4,000 men shared in this meal, to say nothing of women and children. Usually you don't say anything about women and children. He then dismissed the crowds, got into a boat, and went to the neighborhood of Magadan. So where did that abundance come from, that pleroma? It's not, is it just a miracle story? Is it just magic? Where does it come from? And the important thing, I suppose, is to see what it leads to. The idea of scarcity, we don't have enough, is exposed and challenged by the fact that once what is there has been looked at in a different way and blessed, there is more than enough. They all ate to their heart's content. And they were also very ecological. They picked up all the... Good, so we'll take a little quiet break until the midday prayer. Okay.